Hey, what's up? It's Sifu Cuddle, and in this video we are going to be testing two types of cutting targets with three different grades of sword. Now, the two targets that we're looking at will be tatami, which is well known across the sword cutting world and is considered the gold standard when it comes to cutting competition and practice, while the other is going to be a more modern creation, and that is the Lancelot Target, which is newspaper that is soaked and rolled around PPR piping. This target is meant to simulate not only flesh, but bone. And there are three variations available with different thicknesses to simulate the forearm, upper arm, and thigh of the human body. The PPR piping is extremely important as it is not as stiff and brittle as common PVC piping and has a flexibility that is much closer to the human bone. Now, for the forearm target and the upper arm target, the PPR piping is the same diameter. However, it is much thicker on the thigh target so that it matches the same thickness and the same resistance as the femur. To prepare these targets, I'm going to be soaking the tatami rolls for about 3 hours, while as the Lancelot targets only need about 30 minutes of time to soak in the water before they are ready. To cut these targets, I have a base grade katana, a historically accurate reproduction of a Chinese Ming Dynasty sword, and a modern optimized sword. You can pretty much guess how this is going to go, but you can never really predict exactly what will happen until these all have a chance to cut through the targets, and we'll see how that goes. First up is the Mizuchi Katana from dragonsports.eu. It currently lists for $116 on their site and is our base grade katana. It's made of a 1045 carbon steel, which is the minimum carbon count for a functional cutting sword, and has a fairly keen edge out of the box. However, 1045 has the opportunity to bend if there's not good blade edge alignment, so I'm really curious to see how this will hold up on the PPR. Next up is the Chen Crossbowmen's Dao. It lists for $365 on the Chen website, lkchensword.com, and is made of a 1065 and T9 vanadium blend, which gives it a good hardness and flexibility ratio, and of course this beautiful pattern weld. It is a high fidelity reproduction of a Ming Dynasty longsword. Now, this sword is longer and heavier than a standard katana, so I know it will have some authority in the cut, but we'll really have to see how this holds up against harder targets. I have cut with this sword before, so the edge is not as sharp as it would be right out of the box, but it still has a nice keen edge, so I am very interested to see how this will hold up. Last, and certainly not least, is the Lancelot Supreme Cutter Classic. This is an optimized cutting sword designed by Lancelot Chen, a sword expert and world champion cutter. It lists for $1,380 on lancelotsword.com and is made of a high-carbon manganese spring steel. Every aspect of this sword has been analyzed and adjusted to optimize its cutting potential. Now, I have to make a bit of a disclaimer here. This sword is not Lancelot sharp, which means that it just has the basic factory edge. I do believe that at this time, all swords from Lancelot Sword are personally honed to a razor sharp edge by Lancelot himself and are considered Lancelot sharp. So do keep that in mind, that this could actually be sharper when I'm cutting these targets. For the cutting tests, I'm going to be performing the same 3 cuts with each of these swords. So I'm trying to make sure that everything is consistent, and it's important to keep in mind that I am human. So although I will be doing my best, there is still a chance for error and inconsistency. With that said though, you don't have to worry about factors like fatigue because it's only going to be 3 basic cuts per sword, and this is way less than I do in a regular training session. So that's one of those factors that's not really going to be involved. The other thing to keep in mind is I do not train in Japanese sword arts. So all of my training comes from Chinese sword arts. So try not to critique the technique if you come from a Japanese style or a European style, but rather look at the consistency between each sword and each cutting target. Now, very last thing is each of these swords will get a single tatami roll, but I am going to be doing some sharing with the Lancelot target because I want to save some of these targets for another project that I have, and I only have a limited supply. So there will be a little bit of target sharing here. Now that that is all out of the way, let's begin with tatami. They've each been rolled and soaked for 3 hours. Starting off with the Mizuchi, you can see as I cut here, there's a little bit of extra movement on the target itself, and you'll start to notice there's some fraying. You can really see it on this cut, however, you can still follow the path of the cut itself, albeit with a lot of fraying on the outside. My final cut had the best line, cleanest cut, and really the best all around for the Mizuchi. Moving to the Crossbowmen's Dao, you can see a lot less effort to pass the blade through. This goes to the blade edge profile as well as just sharpness of the blade. Having nice clean cuts that you can see along there and minimal fraying. Now I did move this target on the last one, and that's just because of my stand. Finally, with the Supreme Cutter, you can really see it's almost effortless to clear the blade through the target, and there is pretty much zero fraying that's happening here. And again, having a nice clean cut on each, seeing the path of the cut, being able to analyze that is what I like about tatami. All right, there you have it. Tatami is the classic, it's the gold standard, it's the go-to when it comes down to cutting traditionally. And there's a lot of positive things, and really what makes tatami so great is that you can have that tactile feedback. While you're cutting, you can feel it when you're scooping, or if you snag, or if you clear all the way through. And then you also have visual feedback. So you can inspect the tatami after every single cut and check the shape of your cut itself, if you maintained blade edge alignment, or if you ended up scooping or snagging. Now, there are some downsides here, and this is what we really need to talk about. When it comes to getting tatami, unless you have a martial arts store or a supplier near you, you have to order it and you have to wait on shipping time. In my case, getting it here to Switzerland requires me to order from a company here in Switzerland, and then they get their supply from Japan. And this can take up to 1.5 to 2 months to fulfill the order from when I process to the point where I have it at my door. So that wait period, I have to really plan ahead. Then it comes down to the day of logistics. You usually soak tatami for about 3 or 4 hours, so you really have to plan as to when you can cut. Sometimes it's the logistics of where you soak these, if you're going to soak it in a bucket or a bathtub, keeping these wet, making sure that they are completely submerged. These are all really small things, but they do add up in timing. Now, when it came to cutting tatami, I was not surprised. The Supreme Cutter was absolutely the finest cutting. It required little effort, it moved really quick, and again, it felt like there was nothing there in front of my cut. Next would be the Ming Dynasty Chang Dao, or the Crossbowmen's Dao. Again, a lot of good cutting weight behind this, but a thicker cross section that's better for fighting against people in armor. Actually tends to hold this back a little bit. So it made it just a little bit slower. And then of course the Mizuchi at that base level grade katana surprised me. I actually expected it to do worse. There were some moments where it did kind of hook in the cut, but for the most part it cut as well as some other swords. So very impressed on all ends with all 3 swords. And we'll take this and we'll see how this goes against the Lancelot targets. I cannot hide it on my face that I was nervous about these first cuts, but even with the Mizuchi Katana, I was able to cut through paper and the core. However, if my technique was slightly off, I would end up cutting the paper and only into the core, but not all the way through. And this is something that happened quite a lot on this target. And just for a bonus, I thought I'd try my hand at chopping into the thigh thickness, knowing full well I was not going to clear through. The core is much thicker and much harder to get through. Moving on to the Crossbowmen's dowel, I had to clean that one up, cut right through the core. You can see there's no issue there. And then following up with a nice clean cut. Now, I had no issues with this. This comes down to good mass distribution, but you'll see I'm picking off at the top corner, and this has to do with my target stand being kind of low. So you'll see me lurch forward a little bit and I have to drop into the cut, but I could still cut through. Now with a Supreme Cutter, made light work of this target even with the weird posture, and you can see everything's going through. I'm picking off at the corner again, decide to cut a nice thin slice out of that, and I can really feel as the blade's passing through paper and snapping through that core. It was quite a fun experience and probably the most beautiful cut through the thigh target. Well, there you have it, the Lancelot Targets. Now, I have to admit, I was very apprehensive before cutting these because unlike tatami, I have never cut this before. So I really had no idea what to expect, and you got to see it all happen in real time. Now, here's what I would say after looking at these and kind of giving myself some time to think about it. And it comes down to if the tactile feeling of cutting is exactly what you would expect. You do have that resistance. It's very similar to tatami. You have that feeling while you're cutting through, and especially when you go to thicker targets, you're going to feel more resistance, so you have to pay attention to your blade edge alignment and all of that. And then of course the addition of the PPR adds to the whole mix. And I find it to be really fun and a really unique experience. When you try to follow up and look at your cut, you may have a good line on your base, but the paper itself is soaking wet. It's not a very reliable source to inspect your cut. However, the PPR holds it and it doesn't lie. So you can inspect the PPR itself and you can see it even from smaller cuts, even to the smallest cuts. It's going to maintain that shape. So you can really inspect and see how your cut went, if it scooped a little bit or if it cut straight through. This is something that is always really nice about tatami, but tatami is not as reliable because even if you have a nice cut, if this drops and it hits the ground and it folds it back, it can be deceiving. The PPR never changes, so you'll always see exactly how that cut went, and like in this thicker one, in the case of this thicker one, you can see where the cut didn't go through and you can inspect that as well. Now when it comes down to the pros and cons, when we're looking at this, paper is super accessible. You can get newspaper anywhere, you can store it, it's easy to store, it's easy to save, you don't have to order it in advance. PPR might be a little bit different because you do want that flexible piping, you don't want that stiff and brittle PVC piping, but you can also find some very similar substitutes for this type of piping. So again, this is pretty accessible, and I mean, if you do want to order this exactly, you can order from Lancelot. He'll ship them from Hong Kong. But otherwise, he provides instructions on how to build these targets. So you don't have to do it. You don't have to order them. You can build it at your own convenience. Similar to the tatami, this paper makes a huge mess. Basically, you're making giant spit wads and you're going to have them all over the floor. So again, keep that in mind. Now, comparing these two, I would say they're very even in terms of the tactile feeling and being able to scale up. But again, when it comes to accessibility, I would say that the Lancelot Target actually takes the cake because, again, you can make this anywhere. Yeah, now it's time to clean up this giant mess. Well, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed seeing these targets in comparison, seeing these blades work through them. And if you have any questions, drop them down in the comments below. I'll leave links to where you can get these Lancelot targets. And as far as getting your own tatami targets, I would just say look through different websites. I go through one in my country that's more accessible for me, but it might be better for you to get it in your own country. You can just find that on a Google search. Otherwise, I'd love to hear what you guys think, and I'll see you in the next video.